Today's talk is titled Reflections on the Other, to be delivered by our own Robert Wilkinson. Robert has been a member of this congregation and a Cambria resident for approximately 5 years. Before retiring, he was a practicing attorney for 40 years, serving as a legal services lawyer, a public defender, and finally in private practice during that 40-year time span. Most importantly, Robert has been a Unitarian Universalist for the past 30 years, first at the UU Church in Fresno, and now the UU community of Cambria. He is married to his beloved wife, Nancy Tolan, for 40 years. They have 2 children and recently have been happily blessed with a granddaughter. Robert, please beam in and share with us.
There are many examples of the Unitarian Universalist community of Cambria and its members' involvement in social and environmental justice work and the principles of interdependence, justice, and equity. Some of the examples are local and are well known to us. But one example is our involvement with the San Luis Obispo County Food Bank. Every month, a group of our members, led by Janet Cooper, assist the food bank by supplying and distributing food to families in northern San Luis Obispo County. Another example is Kat Lekic, year-round work with the unhoused community in Cambria, encouraging people and helping them survive in a hostile world. And the third example is Wayne Atto. There are many others as well, who for a long time has worked with Green Space and the Cambria Land Trust to protect the environment for everybody's benefit. Each of these local efforts is worth a service of its own. My talk today, however, concerns the application of the principles of interdependence, justice, and equity far away from Cambria. In one case, and in another case, it's of a national scope. In the first, it's about our responsibility as a nation for using and leaving instruments of war in other countries. And in the second case, it's our treatment as a society of essential workers who have come to the U.S. without having the skill and resources to navigate U.S. immigration law. First, in Nancy's and my travels outside the U.S., we observed Laos and the United States struggle with these qualities: interdependence, justice, and equity. We learned that Laos has a sad distinction of being the most heavily bombed country in the world. During the Vietnam War, North Vietnam used the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is in Laos bordering Vietnam. They used the trail to supply North Vietnam troops in South Vietnam. In an attempt to stop the use of the trail, the United States dropped 2 million tons of bombs on Laos, nearly equal to the 2.1 million tons of bombs that the U.S. dropped in all of Europe and Asia during World War II. This amounted to nearly a ton of bombs per Laotian. Some of the 80 million bombs dropped and scattered throughout Laos also failed to explode. After the war, these unexploded bombs continued to kill the Laotians at the rate of anywhere from 300 to 50 a year. This included many children and farmers. During our visit to Laos capital, Vientiane, we visited the Cooperative Orthotic and Prosthetic Enterprise, or COPE. There we saw exhibits of the bombs, and we were told how they were located and disarmed. The exhibits of the removal of the bombs was funded in part by U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. Shortly after our visit to Cope, with disappointment, we learned that the support of the removal of unexploded bombs had been cut back by the United States. This was in disregard, in our mind, to the status as world power that the United States enjoys and its interdependence and dropping excessive bombs on the small country of Laos. Cutting back on the bombs also violated the principle of justice, protecting the Laotian people's ability to thrive, and it violates our principle of equity, protecting the Laotians' right to flourish with dignity, love, and compassion. This experience in Laos raises the question of how many unexploded bombs manufactured or supplied by the United States are there in the Ukraine, Gaza, the Sudan, or other theaters of war. So this issue is one that is bound to come back and call on us for our action. What is the United States' responsibility to disarm and dispose of unexploded ordnance such as this? Here, another example is what we deal with here with the issue of immigration. Reading from a sermon by Mr. Leach, quote, "Few of their children in the country learn English unless the stream of their importation could be turned. They will soon outnumber us. That all of the advantages we have will not be able to preserve our language, and even our government will become precarious." End quote. Does this sound familiar? This complaint was actually made by Benjamin Franklin in the 1750s. Yes, that Benjamin Franklin that some claim was a Unitarian at heart. He opined, quote, "Those who come hither are generally of the most ignorant, stupid sort of their own nation," end quote. And he cited a fellow protectionist who charged, quote, "They are not esteemed men until they have shown their manhood in beating their mothers," end quote. Well, this may sound like the rantings of right-wing radio. It was the 18th century influx of Germans into Pennsylvania that prompted Ben Franklin to fly his kite right into the middle of the debate about immigration. Later, Franklin ominously warned, quote, "If they are not excluded from the United States by the Constitution, within less than 100 years, they will stream into this country in such numbers that they will rule and destroy us," end quotation. This time, the they about whom he was so concerned were Jews whose entry into this country he soundly opposed. More than 2.5 centuries later, we are still struggling with this issue. The claims and warnings made about the injurious effects of immigration are at times equally repugnant and dubious. Beacon Press, the Unitarian publishing house, recently published a book, "They Take Our Jobs and 20 Other Myths About Immigration." This time, the word myth is not being used to mean one of humankind's grounding stories, but rather inaccurate claims based on misinformation. Because of the complexity of this issue and the limitation of our time, I'll briefly visit only the first of these so-called myths. Author Avia Chomsky writes, quote, "Immigrants take American jobs," end quote. This is one of the most common arguments brandished to justify the need for a restrictive immigration policy. No doubt we've all heard that claim. Chomsky goes on to say, quote, the first fallacy lies in the very concept of American jobs, that the idea of jobs having a national identity is practically useless. Chomsky points to the history of U.S. industry seeking to reduce costs by employing, quote, the poorest, most vulnerable people, end quote. As unions and labor laws in this nation make it possible for workers to participate in the benefits of industrialization, companies began to seek cheaper labor elsewhere. Often aided by our own government, companies have been financially rewarded for their participation in what some analysts call the race to the bottom. The concerted effort to find cheaper and cheaper workers around the world. Reverend Leach, the author of part of this talk, was on a corporate responsibility committee for a major Catholic healthcare system, and in that role participated on a trip to the Mexican border just south of Texas, venturing back into a huge shanty town filled with workers in the so-called maquiladora industries. He stopped and talked with a woman who produced a pay stub. He made less than $1 an hour assembling dashboards for a U.S. automaker. Her husband was employed by a U.S. electronics company. Lured to the border by promises of good jobs, their wages instead kept them confined to a sprawling shanty town with ramshackle dwellings, little running water or electricity, and children playing in dusty streets filled with stench. We live and benefit from a global economy. The things we wear, drive, eat, and use are cheaper because some, like this couple, provide an inexpensive source of labor. Those workers now compete in a global economy. But my faith reminds me that my ultimate allegiance, is not to this country. My ultimate self-definition is not as a U.S. citizen. When I say we, I'm constantly challenged to think in larger categories, not we meaning men, not we meaning white people, not we meaning straight people, not we meaning educated progressives, and not even we meaning citizens of this country. As we reflect on complex issues like immigration, as we overhear the voices of immigrants in Cambria, our faith constantly beckons us beyond all narrow definitions of we. It challenges us to expand our scope, to recognize that the real implications of a professed belief in an interdependent web may be less about a peaceful stroll through nature and more about personal dilemmas fostered by our participation in a global economy based on worker exploitation. Maybe that's how we can contribute to the raging debate about immigration, not from a self-interested standpoint, asking, what's in it for me? Not from a nationalist viewpoint, seeing it as us versus them, but from the viewpoint of the interdependent web of human existence, recognizing that in the end, there are no theys, there are only we's. This doesn't offer us any easy or obvious answers. It does suggest a starting point for the conversation. It's one Professor Joseph Campbell commended, using myth as one of the founding starting points and grounding story of humankind. Here's the only myth that is going to be worth thinking about, in the immediate future is the one that is talking about the planet, not the city, not these people, but the planet and everyone on it, for which our faith and hope and commitments pray.
When he's done with clapping, we should put that up. I don't think it's done yet.
So Chomsky notes the notion of jobs having a national identity is increasingly anachronistic. She goes on to cite studies that demonstrate a much more complex relationship between immigration and job loss or gain seems apparent. One of these concludes, no consistent pattern emerges to show that native-born workers suffered or benefited from increased numbers of foreign-born workers. Whether or not this is the case, it is considerably more apparent that the profitability of companies is enhanced when they are free to seek cheap labor anywhere in the world. That's one of Mr. Leach's questions in the debate about immigration. Can you make a moral case that is a moral case for mobile capital and an immobile workforce? That is, how does one morally defend a system that says if you already have resources, you are free to make money anywhere in the world? However, if you are just a worker, you are confined to your own national borders. We do live in a global economy, but do we think globally? Do we act globally? Do we apply ethical standards globally? We are the ones recognizing and professing, quote, a respect for the interdependent web of all existence for which we are a part, end quote. Where immigration is concerned, does the we in that statement refer, who does the we in that statement refer to? I'm not resident to acknowledge my patriotism like Mr. Leach. I love this country. I regularly celebrate what is so wonderful about it. I'm one of those people who actually stops and sings the national anthem at sporting events. It's a little expression of gratitude for all the benefits I enjoy as a citizen. The ultimate definition is not as a U.S. citizen. As I've already mentioned, we have to think of we as being part of a larger category, not meaning men, white people, straight people, educated liberals, or well-meaning citizens. We have to reflect on the issue of immigration when we overhear voices and benefit from the work of immigrants here in Cambria. We have to beckon or see ourselves beyond the narrow definition of we and expand our scope to recognize the implications of the professed belief of an interdependent web. And it may be less about a peaceful stroll through nature and more about personal dilemmas fostered by our participation in a global economy based on worker exploitation. Maybe that's how we can contribute to the debate about immigration, not from the self-interested standpoint, asking what's in it for me, not in the nationalistic viewpoint, seeing it as us versus them, but from a world viewpoint of the interdependent web, recognizing that in the end, there are only we's, there are no they's. This doesn't offer us any easy, obvious answers. Using the myth as one of the founding grounding stories of humankind, the thinking about this issue in the immediate future is one that references the planet, not the city, not the people, but the planet and everybody on it, for which our faith in hope and commitment prays. May it be so.